Hey gang, today I wanted to take you through my process for a heavy metal minimalist style Black Templar. I'll make more on other legions, chapters and factions, and cover theory like lighting and composition, all here on this channel. Step 1. Base coats. For the black areas, I'm using Moldberry from the Army Painter. If you prefer Warhammer brand paint, then Barrack Noir Burgundy is the most similar. We want to start with a nice deep burgundy for this black. This should help make the black on top look richer and purer in the top coat. The aim of this base layer is to use a paint that will colour the Nuln Oil wash that we'll do over the top. This is so I don't have to use multiple different coloured shades over different coloured parts, and instead I can just use the Nuln Oil all over and have a colour underneath to tint it as needed. This layer doesn't need to be perfect, but try and make the coverage uniform. This will help in step 3 as patchy base coats may show through the top coat later. The tint through the shadows will be minimal, but will make a difference. We aren't doing a black glaze like we did on the Raven Guard and the Iron Hands videos, or at least not to the extent that we did on those. For the pauldrons, I'm using matte white from Army Painter or white scar from Warhammer. On the white pauldron in the Lamenters video, we started with an ash grey base coat. You could do that here, but I just wanted to make this as desaturated and white as possible. Try and keep these colours neat on the trim and on panels, as getting them on each other will show through the Nuln Oil and might look a bit odd in the shadows later, especially when wanting to keep this pauldron clean and white. Because it can be hard to paint white without going chalky, I will water my white down to be easy to put on and do a couple of layers, letting each dry before the next. If you want to know more about white paint, I went on a little tangent about chemistry in my White Scars video that I will link to here. But yeah, the aim with this layer is to create that value distance with colour and tone, so armour panels and segments like trim are all separated out, so when they're on tabletop you can still see the definition and details of the mini at distance. Step 2. Nuln Oil. This bit does not need to be careful. Just slop it on, puddle it in the edges and recesses for darker shadows, and try to do entire panels in as few strokes as you can, otherwise you may get tide lines as it dries. Make sure to properly shake your Nuln Oil for a minute, as I've had a couple times I didn't and it's dried glossy because I didn't mix in the pigment well enough with the medium. While this dries, make a cup of tea and think about... Actually, just stop thinking. Your chapter has a stereotype for thinking too much while having smooth brains, but I guess at least you aren't blood angels. Just remember, space racism is okay in Warhammer, just don't get confused and do the real life racism. Like this video, subscribe, and potentially become a channel member to get exclusive channels in my Discord where I post photos of my kitten and take requests for tutorials to make. I also stream painting on here and Twitch if you want to hang out and ask questions, or watch me be bad at Space Marine 2 or other games. Step 3. Top coats. For the black, I'm using matte black by the Army Painter. Warhammer brand Abaddon Black is the alternate. Like with every other time I've covered black as a top coat, I'm still gonna water it down to a kind of medium opacity. Test this by adding water until it gets difficult to manage and make puddles. Remember what this is like, and then let it dry a bit in the palette to thicken up again. Then do this again, but stop before you get to that puddly mess wateriness. So now your black should be thick enough to not be annoying to use or make puddles on the mini, and thin enough to move around easily and leave a thin glaze on the mini. Go layer by layer and let each dry in between so you can check after each for your black value. Let it dry for a minute and then check under a light source to see if you can still see the burgundy base where the light reflects, and that the rest is black looking. Do as many layers as you need or want to get this effect. If you don't want to have this, then feel free to put it on a little thicker. On parts that are up against the wall of another panel, these inside edges, I leave about a millimeter or half millimeter gap between my top coat and the crease so I can have an outline to separate the panels a bit and save me from accidentally going up those walls that should be left dark burgundy. With this dark base and the black on top, this won't be super obvious like the white scar outlines, but is worth doing anyway for that subtle sheen if you want it. If you leave these thin layers kind of patchy and uneven, it can look more battle-worn, and you can use those brushstroke lines and patchinesses to help plan out any weathering or battle damage that you want to add. I don't really do battle damage, I just prefer everything looking super new and clean, and with the colors we're using, I'm not sure how obvious it'll be and how not messy it will look in the end. Be most careful in the recessed armor, such as on this arm under his elbow and wrist plate, to not get the top coat on the perpendicular sides of the extruded surfaces. I'm still trying to keep that millimeter-ish border on the inside corners, but don't worry too much where the gap gets too thin, as long as those perpendicular sides stay clean and nulled. I recommend to pick a plane to be the top and keep perpendicular sides dark over the whole mini. If you want to have some extra depth, you can leave any down or backward facing surfaces with no top coat, and use the top coat color as highlights as per step 4. On those faces, this could either do nothing or be subtly cool AF. Back to the pauldrons. I'm using Army Painter's matte white again, or Warhammer's white scar, and just drawing a semicircle in the pauldron panel, being careful to keep that millimeter from the trim for that outline. Make sure you're happy with this layer before moving on. It should be looking very black and white with a small essence of red in the shadows. Step 4. Highlights. On the black, I use deep grey from the Army Painter. From Warhammer paints, I would recommend Mechanicus Standard Grey. I don't usually like using greys on minis, but on a Black Templar we want to keep him as neutral as we can, apart from that shadow, which is essentially the mini version of matching your handbag to your shoes, but if your handbag are your eye lenses and your shoes are the shadows on your armor. If this grey is too dark for you, then you can always add a dab of white to brighten it. So here I'm essentially outlining all my top coat panels with outside edges, or like on this elbow panel, a sculpted edge in the middle. Because we're doing these over the top coat, if you make a mess, we can go back over this later with more top coat. If you want more depth, only do these edge lines on front and top facing edges, but I'd only recommend this if you also did this with the top coat as well, like I mentioned previously. Otherwise, go all over and edge up all the cliffs and sculpted edges. I tend to water down my paint a bit for this, just so I can use a smaller brush so the paint doesn't dry before I put it on the mini. If you find the edges to look too pale, mix in some more of the darker color you used until you find a shade you're happy with. Adding more of the dark color will lead to more subtle edges, which can be nice. When doing a black scheme like this, there are two options for the gun. Either do it the same process as the armor so the blacks match, or do your regular black with blue-gray highlights. Both are nice. Having it the same will look quite smart, but having them different will make the gun look more distinguished from the boy, especially as we kept him super desaturated. This is probably the bit that took the longest, as I wanted to be careful to not have to redo highlights and to get the thinness of edge lines that I wanted. I used my little tiny brush for this, so I add as much water to the paint as I need for it to not dry on the small brush. If you're doing an entire army in this style, I probably wouldn't recommend sub-assembling, but it can help. If you're going into a fully built and glued mini, only do step 3 onwards on bits you can reach. This will by accident make a nice shadow area behind guns and under arms that will make him look a little more dramatic. With sub-assembly, you can get every surface to look flat and uniform with lighting, so ending with a more cartoony or classic heavy metal result. The only difference this will have to actual heavy metal styling is not doing the highlight lines on the plate surface of the shoulders and knees. This is just personal preference. I don't like how it looks, so I don't do it. On the trim, I'm treating this more like metallics, so I tend to pick outer edges or corners to highlight and then a secondary spot if I feel like it needs it. Try and feather out these highlight spots to avoid harsh tide lines. There are no highlights on the white pauldron unless you want to add that weird heavy metal line, but I don't know what I would use over the white, maybe like a pale ass grey, like Administratum grey, I don't know. The rest of the owl. From this video, learn the things and put it to use on the rest of the mini. This style is good for quick, consistent minis that look good with only a handful of paints. In total, this arm took me about 15-20 minutes, not including the Nuln Oil drying tea break. When I painted the rest of the mini afterwards, it took about the same time as a single arm, maybe a little longer, as it's a very simple process meant to be fast to do. This is my fully finished Black Templar and Furnace Marine in this style, with all his markings free-handed on. You can use transfers, I'm just lazy and I don't have a sheet for him to use. If you do use transfers, remember to use matte varnish over the top to get rid of that shininess. Here is a list of all the things I used in this video. I'll make more videos for the lenses, various guns, and freehanding hacks, so don't panic if yours doesn't look like mine. I don't tend to use transfers, but I can cover those in a video as well if needed. As always, thanks for watching. Check out my other hobby content or my dumbass gaming content on the main channel. Like, sub, leave a comment how you got on, Discord is in the description, and see ya.